Lila Morgan stood nervously at the gates of the Grand Academy, her eyes scanning the towering spires and gleaming structures that loomed before her. The space station was one of the most prestigious military training facilities in the galaxy, and it was considered a rite of passage for the best of the best. Yet, she stood there as the only human cadet among hundreds of aliens, each one coming from a race known for their strength, intelligence, or skill in combat. The whispers started almost immediately. Lila could hear them, even though most of the cadets tried to keep their voices low. It was impossible not to notice her humans were rare in such elite circles, and many considered them weak compared to the advanced alien species that roamed the universe. Lila took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. She wasn't here to back down. She was here to prove herself. The doors to the academy opened with a hiss, and Lila stepped inside. She was immediately struck by the vastness of the place. Hallways stretched for miles, lined with high-tech training equipment, glowing holographic maps, and bustling cadets from various species. Lila couldn't help but feel small. She wasn't used to being the odd one out. On Earth, humans were the top of the food chain. But here she wasn't sure where she stood. Lila tried not to let the stares get to her as she made her way to the briefing room. She'd been through worse back on Earth: years of grueling physical training, endless academic tests, and simulations that pushed her body and mind to their limits. But this was different. The alien races didn't just have different bodies. They had different ways of thinking, fighting, and even perceiving the world. Lila had no idea how she would fit in. As she entered the room, the instructors glanced at her briefly before continuing with their instructions. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere, and Lila realized the cadets were all waiting for her to screw up. They didn't believe a human could succeed here, and they made that clear without saying a word. One cadet, Zarn, caught her attention. A Vex-area species known for their brutal combat tactics and immense physical strength. Zarn was tall, with dark, almost black skin and piercing yellow eyes. He stood at the front of the group, leading the others in mock discussions, his loud voice echoing in the room. When his eyes fell on Lila, his lips curled into a smirk. "Do you think she'll last?" Zarn whispered to his friends, loud enough for Lila to hear. "Humans are soft. No matter how hard she trains, she'll never be able to match our strength or speed." The others laughed. Lila's face flushed with anger, but she didn't respond. She wasn't here to fight back with words. She was here to fight with actions. The first day of training was tough. The instructors didn't give her any special treatment. They threw her into combat simulations with the same intensity as they did with the other cadets. But it didn't take long for Lila to realize that the alien technology used in the simulations wasn't designed for human bodies. Their combat gear, weapons, and even the training programs were built for species that were stronger, faster, and more agile than humans. Lila struggled to keep up, her movements clumsy compared to the fluid grace of her alien counterparts. As the day wore on, Lila's body grew sore, and the words of the other cadets echoed in her mind. "You're too slow. We'll never make it. You're just a human." The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion, it was the mental battle. Lila had always prided herself on her resilience, but the doubts started to creep in. Maybe they were right. Maybe she wasn't meant for this. But then she remembered why she was here. She wasn't just here for herself. She was here for Earth. If she couldn't prove that humanity belonged in the stars, then no one would ever take them seriously. After the training session ended, Lila returned to her dormitory. She collapsed onto her bed, staring up at the ceiling. As her muscles ached, it felt like everything was stacked against her, and she hadn't even begun to fight for her place. But giving up wasn't an option. She refused to let them win without even trying. The next day, the Academy's head instructor, a large tentacled alien named Dracker, called for a briefing. Lila stood quietly at the back of the room as he began to explain the next exercise. The cadets would be tested in a simulated war zone, where they'd be required to survive against enemy forces and work as a team to complete the mission. Lila's stomach twisted. This was her chance to prove herself. She knew the simulation would be tough, but she didn't care. She was going to show them what humans were capable of. As the cadets were divided into teams, Lila found herself paired with Zarn and a few others. She could feel the tension between them, the silent judgment hanging in the air. Zarn didn't hide his disdain for her, and the others followed his lead, keeping their distance. "We're going to lose," Zarn muttered under his breath as they suited up. "I can't believe they put a human on my team. We'll be lucky if we even make it through this." Lila bit her lip and focused on preparing for the mission. The Academy's simulations were as real as it got, and she wasn't going to let anyone think she was weak. She wasn't a human to be underestimated. She was a human who was going to survive. She was going to prove it. As they boarded the transport ship that would take them to the simulation site, Lila glanced at the others. They weren't looking at her, but she didn't care. She would show them. The door to the transport closed with a hiss, and the ship began to lift off, heading toward the unknown. The real test was about to begin, and Lila Morgan was ready to prove them wrong. The next morning, Lila's nerves were on edge as she stood at the edge of the training ground. The Academy's instructors had gathered all the cadets for a special announcement. Today wasn't just another day of standard training, it was going to be the first real test of their abilities. Dracker, the towering alien instructor, stood at the front, his tentacles curling in excitement. "Today, you will face a challenge like no other," he announced in his deep voice. "This will test not only your physical skills, but your ability to adapt, strategize, and survive. Some of you will fail, but only those who push beyond their limits will succeed." Lila stood among the cadets, trying to steady her breathing. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart raced. She had trained hard, but this wasn't just another physical test. It was a chance to prove that she belonged here, that humans were capable of greatness in the galaxy. She wasn't going to let them down. The challenge was a combat simulation in a war zone environment, designed to test teamwork, problem-solving, and survival skills. Each team was assigned a different objective: locate the enemy's base, infiltrate it, and secure an item of value. They had to work together, relying on each other's skills to make it through. There were no second chances. Lila's team was the smallest, consisting of herself, Zarn, and two other alien cadets, Rila, a lithe creature with glowing skin from the Zenthian race, and Durak, a large four-armed being from the Goran species. They were all experienced, skilled in combat and strategy, but none of them had ever worked with a human before. Zarn, as usual, didn't make an effort to hide his disdain for Lila. "This is going to be a joke," he muttered under his breath. "Loud enough for everyone to hear? We'll be lucky if we can even get past the first phase." Lila's jaw tightened. She had heard that before. But this time, she wasn't going to let his words get to her. She focused on the task at hand, was here to show that she could do this, no matter what anyone else thought. The simulation began with a loud siren, and the team was immediately thrust into a harsh, desert-like landscape. The sun beat down on them as they trudged through the barren terrain. Their objective was clear: infiltrate the enemy base and retrieve the encrypted data chip hidden inside. Lila's team moved cautiously, making sure to stay low to the ground. Zarn led the way, his large frame easily blending into the rocky landscape. Rila and Durak followed closely behind, their eyes scanning for any signs of the enemy. Lila kept a few steps behind, staying alert. As they approached the enemy's stronghold, Lila could feel the tension in the air. This was it. Everything they had trained for had led up to this moment. She had to prove herself, and the clock was ticking. But then disaster struck. Zarn, eager to show his superiority, made a rash decision. "We don't need to sneak around," he said, his voice full of arrogance. "We'll take them head on. I'll lead the charge." Before anyone could object, Zarn charged forward, his heavy footsteps echoing across the battlefield. Rila and Durak looked at each other, clearly uncertain about his plan. Lila hesitated for a moment but then followed the team. She knew that if she hesitated now, it would only give them more reason to mock her. The moment Zarn reached the enemies position, gunfire erupted. The team scrambled to cover, but Zarn was already too far ahead, exposed to the enemy. The first wave of gunfire missed him, but the second round hit him square in the shoulder. He dropped to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. Lila's heart skipped a beat. Her instincts kicked in, and she quickly assessed the situation. The enemy was in a fortified position, and they were skilled marksmen. But the biggest challenge wasn't the enemy. It was the team's lack of coordination. Zarn's reckless charge had thrown everything off balance. "Zarn!" Lila shouted, pushing forward. "Stay down." But Zarn, gritting his teeth, struggled to rise. "I'm fine," he growled, clutching his injured shoulder. Just get to the objective."
Ow.
Rila and Durak exchanged frustrated looks.
Ow.
Team was in chaos now, and Lila could see the fear in their eyes. They were used to precision, to perfect teamwork, and now their leader had put them all in danger. Lila took a deep breath. She wasn't going to let them fail. It's not because of Zarn's recklessness, and certainly not because they doubted her. She quickly assessed the enemy positions and the available cover. She saw a narrow gap between two buildings that could offer them a path to the base. "We'll go around," Lila said, her voice calm but firm. "We're too exposed here. Stick to the shadows and follow my lead." Her team hesitated, but then Rila nodded and motioned for the others to follow. Lila led the way, darting from one piece of cover to the next, her movements quick and precise. They had to move fast if they wanted to complete the mission. It wasn't easy. Every step was a risk, every sound a potential alert. But Lila kept her focus. She used her knowledge of human tactics, her ability to think on her feet and make quick decisions. The team followed her lead, trusting her judgment. By the time they reached the enemy base, the others were breathing heavily, their nerves frayed. Lila didn't let up. She signaled for them to stay low, and they crept through the base's outer perimeter, avoiding patrols and security cameras. Finally, they reached the building where the data chip was stored. Zarn, despite his injury, was eager to finish the job, but Lila held up her hand, signaling for him to wait. She knew this was the most critical part of the mission. They had to disable the security system before they could retrieve the chip. "I'll take care of it," Lila said confidently. She knelt down and pulled out a small, portable hacking device. Using her knowledge of Earth technology and a bit of luck, she managed to bypass the security system, disabling the alarms and unlocking the door. The team rushed inside, and there, it was the data chip, just as they had been told. Lila reached for it, but as her fingers brushed the cold surface, she heard Zarn's voice behind her. "Not bad for a human," he muttered, his tone grudgingly respectful. Lila didn't say anything. She simply grabbed the chip and turned to lead the team out. The mission wasn't over yet, but they had done it. They had worked together, and despite Zarn's early mistakes, it succeeded. As they made their way back to the extraction point, Lila couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just about winning the mission. It was about proving that humans could hold their own in the galaxy's toughest challenges. And for the first time, the other cadets might just be starting to believe it. The morning after their successful mission, Lila's team was called into the briefing room. Their victory was acknowledged, but there was little time for celebration. The Academy's instructors had already planned the next challenge this time. It would test their survival instincts. Lila stood at the back of the room, trying to hide the nerves that had started to creep into her. She had done well in the combat simulation, but this was different. They would be sent to a hostile, uninhabited planet where they would be dropped off without any resources. The goal was simple: survive for 48 hours, using only their training and wits to make it through. Lila glanced over at Zarn, who had been quieter than usual. His arm was still bandaged from the previous day's injury, and his posture suggested a lingering sense of discomfort. Despite the wound, he had kept up with the group and refused to let it slow him down. His pride, Lila thought, was stronger than any pain. "Welcome to the survival challenge," Draker's deep voice broke through her thoughts. "This exercise will push your limits like never before. You will need to use every skill at your disposal. Remember, it's not just about strength. It's about adaptability, intelligence, and the will to survive." Zarn muttered something under his breath, but Lila wasn't sure if it was a complaint or a challenge. She didn't care. This was her moment to prove once again that she wasn't just some weak human cadet. The team was split into smaller groups, and Lila found herself paired with Zarn, Rila, and Durak again. The four of them would have to rely on each other to make it through. There was no room for egos or mistakes. Would be given only the bare essentials, basic survival gear, a small map of the terrain, and enough food for one day. After that, they were on their own. The transport ship carrying them to the planet touched down on a rocky, barren surface. A cold wind blew through the area, carrying dust and small stones with it. The landscape was desolate, with jagged cliffs and dry plains stretching as far as the eye could see. "We'll need to find shelter before nightfall," Rilla said, her glowing skin blending with the surroundings. "The temperature drops sharply once the sun sets." Lila nodded, adjusting her gear. She had been through survival training before, but this planet was unlike anything she had encountered. It was unforgiving, and every decision they made could mean the difference between life and death. The team started walking, heading toward the distant mountain range in search of shelter. They needed to find water, food, and a place to rest. But as they moved, it quickly became clear how much they relied on their technology. Rilla had a natural ability to sense the environment. Durek's multiple arms gave him incredible strength, and Zarn's combat skills were second to none. Lila, she had none of these natural advantages. She had to rely on her intellect and instincts. After several hours of walking, they came across a small cave, tucked away beneath a cliff. It wasn't much, but it would offer them protection from the wind. Durek immediately went to check the area for any signs of dangerous creatures. While Rilla used her glowing skin to illuminate the space inside the cave, "This will do for the night," Lila said, her voice steady. "We should gather some firewood and secure the entrance." Zarn grunted but didn't argue. "Fine," he said. "I'll scout for food." As he left, Lila turned to the others. "We need to think about our next move. Tomorrow, we'll need to find water. The food supply won't last forever." Durek nodded, his forearms moving quickly as he gathered sticks and stones for a fire. Rilla stood by the entrance, keeping watch. Lila felt a sense of pride. This was where humans could stand out, where their creativity and adaptability could make all the difference. Night fell quickly, and the temperature dropped. Lila huddled around the small fire they had started, her eyes flicking to the dark shadows outside the cave. The wind howled in the distance, and every now and then, the sound of something scurrying across the rocks sent a chill down her spine. Zarn returned after a while. His arms full of small alien fruits, he tossed them into the fire without a word, and sat down beside them. The fruits smelled strange, but Lila didn't hesitate. They needed to eat. "Do you think we'll make it?" Rilla asked quietly, her eyes flicking toward Lila. Lila smiled, though it was a tired smile. "We have to." And yet, as the night dragged on, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cave seemed too quiet, and the air felt thick with tension. As the others slept, she stayed awake, listening to the wind and the occasional sounds of creatures moving outside. Just before dawn, something stirred in the distance. Lila stood up, her heart racing. What? She couldn't explain it. But she felt a strange sense of danger creeping closer. The others were still asleep, unaware of what was coming. Then, she saw a large shadow moving toward them from the edge of the cave. It was too big to be just an animal. Lila's instincts screamed at her to wake the others, but she didn't know what to do. The creature, or whatever it was closing in. She had to act quickly. Lila grabbed a large rock from the ground and held it tightly in her hands. She didn't have the physical strength to defeat whatever was coming, but she could make noise, create a distraction, anything to give her team a chance. As the creature approached, Lila threw the rock, aiming for a small rock formation near the creature's path. The loud sound of the rock hitting the stones echoed through the cave. The creature paused, sniffing the air. Lila held her breath, praying that it wouldn't find them. For a long moment, everything was still. Then the creature turned and lumbered away, vanishing into the darkness. Lele let out a shaky breath and turned to wake her team. It was a close call, but they had made it through the night. She had done it. She had kept them safe, and she had used her wits to protect them when brute strength wouldn't do. As the sun rose over the alien landscape, Lila knew this was just the beginning. The challenge was far from over, and if they wanted to survive, they had to keep moving, keep thinking, and keep fighting together. This was her test, and she was determined to pass it. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the barren landscape. Lila stretched her arms and wiped the sleep from her eyes. The night had passed without further incident, but the challenge wasn't over. It still had to find a way to survive for another 24 hours, and the pressure was building. The team gathered their things quickly, preparing to leave the cave that had sheltered them from the cold winds. Duroc had taken watch during the night, and now it was time for him to lead the group forward. "We need to head west," Duroc said, his deep voice rumbling as he scanned the horizon. "There's a river near the mountains. If we follow it, we'll be able to find water." Lila nodded. She knew the terrain well enough from the maps they'd been given, and Durac's strength was a huge asset in this environment. But as they began walking, she could see the weariness in everyone's eyes. They had barely slept, and the harsh conditions were beginning to take their toll. They needed to find a better place to rest, but first, they needed water. ECRN, who had been quieter than usual, grumbled as he adjusted the bandages on his shoulder. "This is ridiculous. We shouldn't be out here like this," he muttered. "We should have completed the mission yesterday, not wasted time wandering through this godforsaken planet." Lila didn't respond. She had learned early on not to argue with Zarn when his pride was wounded. He wasn't used to being in a position where he couldn't rely on his natural strength. Lila, on the other hand, had never been the strongest or the fastest. But she had learned to rely on her mind, her ability to think quickly and adapt to any situation. As they trekked through the rocky terrain, Lila couldn't help but feel the weight of the challenge pressing on her. It wasn't just about surviving now. It was about proving herself, about showing the other cadets that humans weren't weak. She knew she could do it, but the longer they stayed on this harsh planet, the harder it would become. "We're getting close," Duroc called out, pointing toward a narrow valley between two towering cliffs. "The river should be just beyond that ridge." The team pushed forward, eager to reach the river. After hours of walking, the sound of rushing water reached their ears, and soon they came upon the riverbank. The cool, clear water flowed rapidly through the rocky landscape, and the team immediately began drinking. Their thirst overwhelming after the long hours in the heat, as they rested by the river, Lila felt a strange sense of peace. They had made it this far, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, they could relax. But she knew they couldn't afford to linger for too long. The challenge wasn't over yet, and they still needed to find shelter before nightfall after. A short break, Lila stood up and looked around. The river wound through the valley, and there was a small hill on the other side. It was the perfect place to set up camp for the night. Away from the predators and the dangers lurking in the shadows. "We should head over there," Lila said, pointing to the hill. "It's high ground, and we'll have a better view of the surroundings." Ankh shot her a skeptical glance. "You think we can make it there before dark?" "We have no choice," Lila replied. "It's either that or risk being caught by something worse than the predators we've seen so far." With a reluctant nod, Zarn agreed, and the team made their way across the river. As they climbed the hill, the weight of the survival challenge began to sink in. They had managed to find water, but food was still a problem, and shelter was even more important. Night was falling quickly. They needed a place to rest before the temperature dropped again. As they reached the top of the hill, Allah spotted a small, cave-like structure in the distance. It was a natural rock formation, just large enough to provide cover for the team. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "We can make camp there," Lila said. "It'll keep us out of the wind." The others followed her lead, and they made their way to the cave, setting up a small campfire. Duroc used his strength to move large rocks and create a makeshift barrier. Orilla gathered some dried plant material to help start the fire. Lila sat back, watching the others work. Despite the tension between them, the team was functioning well together. They had learned to rely on each other, even if they didn't always agree, as the fire crackled. Lila couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. They had made it through another day, and they were one step closer to completing the challenge. But there was no time to relax just yet. The night would be long, and they needed to stay alert. I've been thinking, Rilla said, breaking the silence. We're being tested not just for our physical skills, but for our ability to adapt. You've shown us that, Lila. Lila looked up, surprised by the compliment. I'm just trying to do my part, she said quietly. We all have our strengths. Zarn, who had been sitting in silence, scoffed. I'll admit, you've done better than I expected, he muttered. Don't get ahead of yourself. We're still not out of the woods. Lila didn't respond. She didn't need to. The words didn't bother her anymore. She had come here to prove that humans had what it took to survive, and so far, she had done that later that night. As the team huddled around the fire, the instructors' voices echoed in Lila's mind. She knew the next phase of the challenge was coming soon. They would be tested again this time with the final scorecard. The Academy was watching closely, and she had no idea what the outcome would be. When the results came in the next day, Lila was still unsure of how she had done. The scores from the combat simulations were revealed, and to her surprise, she ranked in the top tier of cadets. It wasn't the first place, but it was higher than most of the alien cadets had expected. Zarn, standing behind her, clenched his fists. I don't know how you did it, he said, his voice tight with frustration. But I have to admit, you earned your place here. Lila turned to him, her expression calm. I told you I would. The morning after the results were posted, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that the Academy was watching her every move. The initial survival challenge had been a success, and her score had improved significantly, but she knew the final test was still to come. Today, everything would be decided. The cadets gathered in the large training arena, a massive open space designed for combat duels. Lila felt a mix of anticipation and nerves. Today wasn't just another survival test or tactical mission. It was a one-on-one combat duel, and Lila was about to face Zarn, the one who had mocked her the most. Lila had never backed down from a challenge. But facing Zarn, a towering alien warrior, was different. Despite everything that had happened, she knew Zarn was still the strongest of them all. He had years of combat experience and a natural advantage in strength. The Academy's instructors lined the edges of the arena, observing the cadets as they prepared for the duel. Lila stood in the center, her heart pounding in her chest. Zarn was already there, towering over her, his arms crossed and a confident smirk on his face. You sure you're ready for this, human? Zarn's voice boomed across the arena. I don't want you to get hurt. You've already proven yourself. There's no shame in quitting. Lila's jaw clenched. She wasn't here to quit. She wasn't here to prove anything to Zarn. She was here to prove to herself, to her team, and to everyone watching that a human could stand toe-to-toe with the best. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. Are you? Zarn's smirk faltered. For a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. We'll see, he said. With a sharp gesture, the duel began. Lila had never been trained for direct combat like this. She didn't have the strength or the experience that Zarn had, but she had something else her mind. She had learned to think quickly, to react with precision, and to never underestimate the power of surprise. Zarn charged first, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. He swung a fist toward Lila, and the force of it sent a gust of air toward her. Lila ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding the blow. She didn't hesitate, using her agility to slip behind him, but Zarn was fast. He turned, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her toward him. For a moment, Lila's mind went blank, but she quickly remembered her training. She twisted her body, using his grip against him. With a sharp movement, she broke free from his hold and took a few steps back, keeping her distance. Impressive, Zarn growled, wiping a bit of blood from his lip. But you'll need more than that to beat me. Lila didn't respond. She couldn't afford to waste words. She had to stay focused. Zarn lunged again, but this time, Lila anticipated the move. She sidestepped, using his momentum against him. As he stumbled past her, Lila grabbed a nearby training baton that had been left on the ground. She swung it at his legs, tripping him up. Zarn fell to the ground with a grunt, but he quickly recovered, jumping back to his feet. Lila could see the frustration on his face. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered. For the first time, It was clear that he was starting to respect her as a fighter. The duel continued, with Zarn attacking relentlessly. Each time he struck, Lila dodged, ducked, or blocked, using her speed and wits to stay one step ahead. The longer the fight went on, the more exhausted she became. She was wearing down, and Zarn could feel it. His strikes were heavier now, his attacks more deliberate. Lila needed to end it before she lost her focus. As Zarn swung another heavy punch, she saw her opening. She ducked beneath his arm, using her free hand to knock his feet out from under him. As he fell backward, Lila moved quickly. With all the strength she could muster, she shoved him to the ground. Pinning him there, Zarn struggled beneath her, his muscles straining, but Lila held him down, using every bit of her training and experience to keep him from getting up. She wasn't just fighting with her body, she was fighting with her mind. Calculating each move, waiting for the perfect moment, the instructors signaled the end of the match as Lila's knee pressed firmly into Zarn's chest.
I'll be him.
Place. The entire arena was silent for a brief moment before the sound of cheers erupted around her. She had won. Lila stood up, breathing heavily, and offered a hand to Zarn. He looked up at her, his face a mix of surprise and admiration. For a moment, there was no animosity between them, only respect. "You really did it," Zarn muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't think a human could. I told you I would," Lila interrupted, smiling softly. "Humans don't back down." Zarn didn't argue. He took her hand, letting her help him to his feet. As he stood, he gave her a respectful nod. "You've earned my respect," he said, his voice quieter now. "I didn't believe you could do it, but you proved me wrong," Lila nodded, her chest swelling with pride. She had done it, not just for herself, but for humanity. This victory was more than just a physical win. It was a statement. She had shown the galaxy that humans could stand alongside the strongest warriors, that they had the strength and resilience to fight back when it mattered. As the crowd's applause grew louder, Lila looked around at the other cadets. Some were still shocked. Others were beginning to nod in acknowledgement. She had earned her place here, and she wasn't going anywhere. But the fight wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to face. But Lila knew one thing for sure. She was ready for whatever came next. And now, no one would underestimate her again. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the training arena. Lila stood at the edge of the field, her chest still heaving from the intense duel. The roar of the crowd echoed in her ears, but she hardly noticed. Her mind was focused on the victory, on the feeling of standing tall after everything she had been through. She had done it. She had beaten Zarn, the strongest cadet, in front of everyone. The moment had been hers, and she could feel the respect. In the air, the other cadets were starting to look at her differently, but more importantly, she was beginning to believe in herself in ways she hadn't before. Zarn approached her slowly, his usually confident stride a little less sure. His shoulder was still bandaged from the previous day's injury, and his face was a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. He had expected to win, but Lila had proven that humans were capable of much more than he had ever imagined. "You actually did it," Zarn said, shaking his head as he came to a stop in front of her. "I underestimated you. I thought I could crush you easily. But you," he paused, clearly at a loss for words. "You're different." Lila didn't say anything at first. She simply met his gaze, holding her ground. The moment of victory wasn't about gloating or rubbing it in his face. It was about something more important, showing that humans had what it took to be more than just survivors in a galaxy full of powerful species. "I told you I would," she said quietly. "Humans don't back down." Zarn looked at her for a long moment, and then, without another word, he gave a short nod. It wasn't much, but for Lila, it was enough. The respect he had been unwilling to give her earlier had been earned, and she had won not just the duel, but something more, his acknowledgement, as the other cadets started to gather around, whispering. Among themselves, Lila could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The mocking whispers that had followed her since the first day had stopped. Instead, there was an undercurrent of curiosity, respect, and maybe fear. Lila had changed their view. of humans forever. She had done what no one thought was possible. The Academy's commander, a tall alien with multiple eyes and tentacles, stepped forward, his voice booming over the crowd. Det, Lila Morgan, you have shown extraordinary strength, skill, and perseverance. Your victory today has proven that humans have earned their place among the stars. You may have been underestimated, but today you stand as a true warrior. The crowd erupted into applause, and Lila felt her heart swell with pride. This wasn't just her win, which was a win for every human who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or doubted. It was a victory that would echo across the galaxy, and Lila was proud to be the one to deliver it. But as the applause died down, Lila knew that this wasn't the end. The Academy had many more challenges in store, and this victory, while important, was just one step in her journey. She had earned respect, but respect alone wouldn't be enough to get her through the coming tests. She needed to stay sharp to keep pushing herself, to show the galaxy that her victory wasn't a fluke. Lila turned to her team, who had been watching from the sidelines. Rila smiled at her, her glowing skin shimmering in the fading light. "You did it, Lila," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "Prove them all wrong." Dirac, who had been stoic throughout the entire duel, grinned and slapped her on the back. "Well done, human," he said. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone take down Zarn like that before." Lila smiled at her team, grateful for their support. She had come a long way since her first day here, and while she knew the path ahead would still be challenging, she felt more confident than ever. As they began to walk off the arena, Zarn, who had been silent for the past few minutes, suddenly spoke again. "Lila," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I've been thinking about what you said about humans not backing down. Maybe we've underestimated you all along. Might not have the strength we do, but you've got something else, something we could learn from." Lila turned. To him, surprised, Zarn wasn't the type to admit weakness, and hearing him say this was a rare moment of vulnerability. "What do you mean?" she asked, genuinely curious. Zarn looked away for a moment before answering. "That strength is everything. But I've realized that maybe there's more to being a warrior than just brute force. You've got that in spades. You think things through. You don't just rely on your muscles, you rely on your mind, and that makes you dangerous in a way." I didn't expect. Lila didn't know how to respond. She had always known that humans didn't have the physical advantages that other species had, but she had learned to compensate for it. She had learned to think, to adapt, and to push past her limitations. Hearing Zarn's acknowledgement was a step forward, not just for her, for humanity as a whole. "Thanks, Zarn," she said, smiling slightly. "I've always believed we had something unique to offer. Maybe now you see that too." No. Nodded, his pride bruised, but his respect for her undeniable. "I see it," he admitted, "and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of it in the future." As they walked back toward their quarters, Lila couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The galaxy was vast, and there were still so many challenges ahead. But for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. She wasn't just a cadet from Earth, she was a warrior, capable of standing toe-to-toe with the greatest fighters in the galaxy, and this was just the beginning.